Hey, spiritual extremists, it's Dr. Lloyd-Moffett here at Halcyon again. And to continue the story of Halcyon, you had Francia Ledoux and Dr. Dower move out to California to try to start a society based on this universal teachings. But they still wanted guidance from the spiritual masters. And of all the spiritual masters that touched them, this guy, Hilarion, was the one who was most attached to Dower and Ledoux. Now, it said Hilarion has been a bunch of people throughout history. He inspired the spirit of St. Paul and others. But for whatever reason, Dower and Ledoux would ask Hilarion guidance for establishing their spiritual community here, and particularly Francia Ledoux, who was the first guardian-in-chief of Halcyon, would go into trances, and Hilarion would use her body to share wisdom from the other side. And it's a great background to talk about William James's second quality of the mystical experience. That is, he said that the mystical experience is something that's noetic. Like the faculty of that's behind the experience is not emotion, it's not intellect, it's something beyond that. It's not something, it's not insight or illumination in a academic way. It's not like you had a moment of realization of, oh, now I understand this formula, but rather it's something that goes beyond it. It's maybe spiritual insight or spiritual illumination. It's direct and intuitive. It's something qualitatively different than having a knowledge of states or something like that. And it becomes authoritative because of that. That is, it becomes something so real that you have to change who you are. That's the Saint Paul on the road to Damascus story, that once he has this mystical experience with Jesus, he can't be the same person. He transforms 180 degrees. Let me go a little bit more into background here, because the idea, to understand the idea of a noetic experience, you kind of have to understand the Greek from which it is based. In ancient Greek physiology, there was a faculty of the human person called the nous. Now, for those who are experienced with Christian New Testament, Paul and the Gospels often talk about renewing your mind. Well, in all those cases, it's not the mind as we think about it, not the intellect, but we're renewing the nous. And the nous is something that we don't conceptualize in modern physiology. So it's a little bit strange for us. But there was this belief that there was a sort of filter that stood between our external environment and our mind. It was kind of a means by which the external environment would be shaped and framed for our mind. And one of the ways of conceptualizing the fall of humans for Christians, what went wrong with humanity, is that we have a fallen nous. And so for Christians, the idea was that our lens through which we experience the world has become darkened, has become unillumined. And one of the things that Jesus did in taking on a human body was to illumine, to gain clarity. And it's a little bit like this. The belief among many of the early Christians was we walk around the world like we have those glasses, those drunk driving glasses. I don't know if you did this in high school, but in my high school, the cops came and gave a little presentation against drunk driving, and they would say, put on these glasses, and they would have everything be blurry, and they're like, that's what it's like when you're drunk trying to drive. You don't want to do that. Well, the idea is we have sort of glasses, spiritual glasses through which we see the world, and sometimes those misfunction or darkened or distort or have problems with it. And those spiritual glasses, the nous, have become distorted. And at least for Christians, the idea is Jesus clarifies that nous. We can see the world through a spiritual lens defined by Jesus. But what James is trying to say here is that idea that we experience the mystical experience is not through the senses, it's not through the intellect, it's through a spiritual sense. This is the sort of third eye of Hinduism. This is the spiritual sensor of Taoism. It is a spiritual lens through which we have the mystical experience. And what James argues is that is common to all those who have mystical experience. It's a noetic experience, not emotional, not intellectual, not bodily or sense experience, but a noetic experience, the spiritual eye, the spiritual lens, the things that allows us to see the world in a spiritual way. That's what is shaped in the mystical experience.